Transmitting in Elliott Lake at 102.5, Manitoulin at 102.1, North Bay at 103.5, and Sudbury at 95.5. Our company name is Eternicom, and our call letters are CJTK, Kingdom Focused Ministry. We are KFM.
And welcome to another edition of The Tough Questions. Each and every Friday morning from 9 till 9:30, we tackle some topics that the church faces and that has questions from within the church, and often questions that come to the church from outside of the church. So this week, we are going to tackle this topic with our special guest who's in the studio with us. It is this tough question today. Did God really create the earth in 6 literal days? That's this morning's tough question here. And our guest to chat with us over the next half hour is Randy Ruggles. And Randy is, amongst other things, he's an author. He is the host of Beyond Belief, which is a television program which is on Cogeco Channel 12 here in North Bay. And he's has a passion for the creation-evolution debate. And you'll often see Randy talking about that either on television or in book form as well. And he's our guest this morning. Randy, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Dean.
Nice to have you here. Now, listen, we're going to start off with the creation of the earth question, and who knows if it'll go into other areas of. Basically, we're looking at Genesis here this morning and the literal translation. What's your take on it now? Just so we know off the top, is your belief that God did create the earth? When it says 6 days, it is 6 literal days as we know it today.
Well, I think one of the fundamental questions that we have to answer initially is do we think God's powerful enough to do it in 6 days?
Right.
And I would certainly say that he is. So I would say, why couldn't it be 6 days? So what it really comes down to is what is the Bible telling us when we look at the original Hebrew, which I should preface this by saying I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any means, but what exactly did the Hebrew people believe, and what is the Bible telling us when we read it? And it seems to indicate to me, certainly, and I've got a mountain of evidence here that I'm going to present in a minute, that it does indicate that they are 6 literal days, just like we experience now.
This is a topic here because, you could say, well, people who don't go to church or who aren't believers, they're the ones who argue that it's not 6 days, that it's just a story, or it's, it's an allegory. But there's even people within the church who a little wavy on the 6 days, and if pressed, some of them will say, well, it's just 6 days means, it's just a story. God did create the earth, but it was over time.
Sure.
How do you answer that?
Well, what you often find is people who don't take it literally and try to press long periods of time into those days, or maybe put long periods of time before the days began, they're usually trying to fit in evolution. And so that's an area we may go into later in this chat, is that if you find that they're trying to fit in evolution, then, I've done some research and written a book on evolution, and I don't believe that it is true. So therefore, I can look at the evidence and weigh it both ways. I can have long ages, or I can have it be 6 literal days, because I don't have to fit in evolution. So I can be objective and take the text as it's written.
So if you're talking to someone, what is your proof that it was that it is 6 literal days? Okay. What's some of the arguments that you hold?
Sure. Well, first let me just explain that the word in Hebrew, the word day that is used throughout Genesis is yom, and it does have 3 different meanings. Nobody disputes that day can mean different things. And one example is that it is a literal 24-hour day. You also have day versus night, the lighted portion of the day, and you have a period of time. We might say in George Washington's day or something like that. And so actually I have a sentence here that uses all 3. Back in my grandfather's day, it took 12 days to drive across the country during the day. So it actually uses all 3 different meanings in that one sentence.
Okay.
Now, why do I think that the Bible indicates that they are literal days? There's a few reasons. First of all, when it says first, second, third day, it's always modified, first of all, by evening and a morning. Throughout Genesis 1:5, 1:8, 13, 19, 23, and 31, it says there was an evening and a morning. Also, outside Genesis 1, Yom is used with a number 359 times, and it always means a literal day. Anytime it's used with a cardinal number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or what's called an ordinal number, saying the first, second, third, fourth day, anytime like that that the word Yom is used with a number, it always means a literal 24-hour day. And third, there are other Hebrew words for long periods, for example, olam and kedem, that could have been used to mean long ages or long periods of time if that's what the author intended. So there's just a few of the reasons right there. And then maybe later we can get into what some of the objections are to this.
Right. One of the verses that people always bring up is that in the Bible it also says, a day is as 1,000 years. So maybe that's what they're referencing. Maybe when they say a day, maybe it means actually 1,000 years.
Good point. Now, first of all, where that is found is Psalm 90. Verse 4 and 2 Peter 3:8, they say basically a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years. What they sometimes forget is in the New Testament passage, it also says, and 1,000 years is as a day. Oh. They don't quote the second part of the verse, which cancels out the first part of the verse. Right. So what they're really saying is if you look at both these passages, they're not talking about the creation account here. They're really saying that God is outside of time, right. And they're talking about his return, or Jesus' return, of course, that God's time is not like our time, and he's going to do things in his own time, and so really it shouldn't be applied to the creation account, that verse.
So when people say that, it's not even related to anything to do with Genesis, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's really just taking that out of context.
Right.
Another point I would make is that even if you made each literal day, the 6 days of creation, 1,000 years, you'd only have 6,000 years. That's not going to help trying to fit in evolution right. in the least. So just take it as it's written, I'd say. Let's
stay with people from within the church now. And we'll talk about evolutionists here in a minute.
Sure.
Why do people, even like you and I are on this? I'm trying to play both sides here, but you and I are on the same side of the fence here when it comes to we both believe that in the 6 literal days. But there are people that I know who are friends of mine that they can't quite go there, right? I mean, they're believers. They go to church, but they think it's more. They believe God created everything, spoke it into existence. But to say it was done in 6 days, it's a hard leap for some people. Why is that?
Well, it seems to me that they're, first of all, some of them maybe just haven't studied the text clearly enough.
Right, sure.
But the other reason is that something I hear often is that people look around the world and it seems to appear to be very old. So to them, they just can't accept that it could have been 6,000, 6 days, 6 to 10,000 years ago because the world looks old. And of course, that's because of the influence of the media and secular scientists who are telling us that the age of the earth is very old. What I do is I look around and I see, if you believe that there was a global flood, I look around and see what actually is evidence for long ages is really evidence for damage, for destruction. So a lot of the things that look very old to us, it's really just because there's been a global flood. And you'll usually find people who are trying to fit in long ages and evolution usually deny a global flood. I don't know if some of the Christians that you're referring to also deny a global flood, but I would suggest that maybe they just haven't thought it through quite enough.
Now let's talk about people who are, who may not be believers. They have a hard time with many of the accounts in the Bible. Isn't it almost impossible to argue creation or the 6 days creation with people like that? Because you kind of have to buy into it a little bit first, right?
Sure.
Into the Word of God. So then you're kind of, how do you argue that with someone who's just completely outside of it and just sees them as a bunch of nice stories?
Good point. You can't start arguing with someone about the legitimacy of the Bible if they don't believe that is the Word of God, if they don't even believe in God. So usually when I'm talking with someone, an atheist perhaps, I'll usually start with some arguments that deal with science and logic only, that kind of indicate, again, there's no way to prove 100% that God exists, but scientifically I should say, but we can certainly start making some logical arguments first, and once their mind is open to the idea that God exists, then we can say, okay, now, if God exists, has he revealed himself to us in some way, and how would we know? And so then we gradually move into the evidences from the Bible and the prophecy and that type of thing that I think give credence to the fact that the Bible is the inspired Word of God.
It's 10 minutes after 9. We're speaking with Randy Ruggles. He's our guest here this morning. The tough question is, did God really create the earth in 6 literal days? That is the topic. And, of course, I imagine over the course of the next 20 minutes here, with time flying by quickly, we'll get into the evolution theory. But that's almost a whole other show in itself, right?
Absolutely.
So let's stay in Genesis here for a second. So when God says, of course, he rested on the 7th day, right? So oftentimes we'll throw in, he created it in 7. Well, he actually did. He rested on the 7th day. In that time, 6 literal days, when people have this discussion with you, whether they're believers or not, I've heard people say, if you don't buy into the 6 literal days, at what point in the scriptures do you start buying into it? And maybe I'm speaking more now people who do believe in the Bible. If you don't believe the 6 days, then do you start believing what happened in Numbers and Deuteronomy? Mm-hmm. Like, where do you start, right? Is that part of your argument as well?
Sure, and I would say, by looking at the actual text, Hebrew scholars can examine. They know that there are certain phraseologies that determine whether a text is meant to be allegorical or literal. And I always use examples like I'll say, people ask me, well, you don't take the Bible literally, do you? Well, I say, well, I take the literal parts literally and the figurative parts figuratively. And I don't mean to be cheeky when I say that, but I'll say examples like, well, Jesus said he was the door, but I don't believe that he was made of wood and had hinges.
Right.
The point is that there is poetry, there is allegory, but there is also literal history, and it's our job to figure out exactly which is which. And so, I think I would rely on the Hebrew scholars that know how to read the text and how the Jews actually understood this to be. And from my understanding, they all understood it to be literal 24-hour days.
How long do evolutionists say that the Earth took to be created?
4.6 billion years for the Earth, that it formed 4.6 billion years ago, and that the universe, the Big Bang, happened 13.72 billion years ago. I just want to make a point there that I find it kind of humorous that I've had conversations with atheists, and they'll say, regarding the Bible, they'll say, well, no one can know what happened 2,000 years ago. And yet they'll say with certainty that the universe was created from a Big Bang 13.72 billion years ago.
Right.
They even get the 2 in there.
Right.
So
but even that number has changed over the years, right? I mean,
sure.
Because there doesn't seem to be anything really evolving within modern history. So they have to keep making the number bigger and bigger, don't they?
True. And they will say that, we don't observe it because it happens too slowly within our lifetime. But then they say that you should see it in the fossil record. And ironically, when they don't see it in the fossil record, they say, well, it happens too quickly to see it in the fossil record, but too slowly to see it in person. Yeah, but you're right. They keep moving back the date further and further of the Big Bang. But I think they're getting closer now to what they're synthesizing the number down, and they've been pretty confident with the 13.72 for about a decade or so now.
On your show, Beyond Belief, you've had many discussions on this topic, and you've had atheists on your show, and you had some really interesting discussion. When you talk about this topic with evolutionists who obviously don't believe in the 6-day literal creation of Earth, they probably scoff at it and
absolutely
and think it's nonsense.
Bible says in the last days there will come scoffers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Also very true.
Yep.
So when you're talking about that, when you're talking about the age of the Earth, is it a tough argument for you to make that the Earth isn't billions and billions of years old? Because the science doesn't really prove it, right? So how do you have that discussion when you say, well, how old do you think the Earth is? By the way?
Well, I would say 6,000 to 10,000 years old,
right.
And I would just make a point about when you say science doesn't prove it. I often talk with people. One of the things I learned in writing my book is that science actually doesn't prove anything. You don't get absolute proof from science, and that is not in any way denigrating science. It's just recognizing that it has limitations, and so you can't prove anything at all scientifically, but you can have evidence. And I would say that there is plenty of evidence that the Earth is much younger than what secular scientists say. Maybe we could do another show on that sometime where we go into the actual evidences for the age of the Earth being much younger. I will admit that one of my evidences is the biblical account that seems to indicate that it's 6,000 to 10,000 years old, but there's also many scientific evidences that indicate that it's certainly much younger than what scientists say it is.